dear lady from this church. She has something to share from her heart, and it's Barbara Bambas, right? Barbara, come on up.
I didn't know I was so soon. Many years ago, I was in a women's Bible class where the instructor gave each of us the name of the woman in the Bible. And she asked us to research this woman and to come back and tell the story and tell it as if we were that woman and how she would have felt. Well, I know that all of you have read about women in the Bible. And there's some of them that are not identified by name. So we know them as the woman who touched the hem of Jesus' garment, or the woman at the well, or the adulterous woman. Well, tonight I'm going to step into the shoes of one of these women. And since there is so little about information-wise in the 8th chapter of John, things that I think very well could have taken place based on Jewish law. And as I said, there's very little about me in the Bible. Nothing about my parents, nothing about my background. So I'm going to take the liberty of adding a few things. Things that I think could very well have taken place based on Jewish law. My story takes place in Jerusalem, and probably the same week that Jesus was condemned to die. It's not easy for me to stand here and admit to you that I was the adulterous woman, and that I was caught in that very act. I was so scared. I was ashamed, and I feared for my life, because I knew what the penalty was. The penalty was death by stoning. And I have witnessed what a slow, painful, miserable death that is. I was just petrified. Well, just put yourself in my place. How do you think you'd feel? I can see some of you looking at me, and you're thinking, how in the world did she ever get herself in such a predicament? Was it just a bad marriage put together by their parents? Was my husband abusive? Or was I promiscuous? Well, we'll never know, because the Bible doesn't tell us. Not a thing. And we live here under the same law that God gave Moses so many, many years ago. Well, that is, unless one of our laws runs contrary to the Roman law, because you see, they are the political, the economic, and the military force in our area. But they really don't want to get involved in our religious matters. So as I said, we live by the same laws that were given to Moses. And that says that both the man and the woman that were caught in such a situation were to be stoned to death. Well, I was taken to stand trial before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is like the Jewish Supreme Court. And it's ruled over by the chief scribes, who are the interpreters of the law, and the Pharisees, who are the watchdogs of the law. Well, I expected that when I got to court, I would see my partner in this crime. But there's no further mention of him. But I have heard of cases where men have escaped, where they've been allowed to pay a bribe. Well, nevertheless, I stood trial. I was found guilty, and I was condemned to death by stoning. Well, the authorities took me out of the courthouse. They took me outside, and I thought, this is it. This is when they're going to stone me. say a word. He just stooped over and he started writing something on the ground. And I couldn't tell if he didn't hear him or if he was just ignoring him. It sort of aggravated me. And it wasn't until later that I found out that these men felt that Jesus was totally disrespectful of their laws and their traditions. And his popularity worried the religious leaders because they were afraid of losing their influence and their power. It was a tense situation. These men just didn't like Jesus at all. And if he were to say that I should be stoned to death, he would be going against his own teachings and his way of mercy. And if he said I shouldn't be stoned to death, he'd be going against Jewish law. And that was considered an act of blasphemy and also punishable by death. It was easy to see that Jesus' answers would have something to do with the future of both of us. And I realized that they were trying to trick Jesus and they were using me instead. Well, by this time, these people were getting very aggravated, especially the authorities. And they asked, one of them asked Jesus again, what do you say that we should do with this woman? Well, Jesus slowly stood and he said, he who is without sin, let him throw the first stone. And then he stooped back over and started writing something on the ground. Oh my. I just hung my head and I closed my eyes. And I waited for that first stone to hit. And I waited. And I waited. And then I heard some shuffling of feet. And I opened my eyes, looked behind me, and the authorities were leaving. They were leaving the courtyard. In fact, they were leaving the temple. And they were being followed by all the other people there. And then I knew what it was to be alone. I mean, really alone. There I was, facing Jesus. And he said to me, woman, where are your accusers? Hath no man